This is Sportish.
Do it better.
This is Sportish. This is Sportish. This is Sportish. This is Sportish.
This is Sportish. Welcome in on For the Fans, or perhaps you're listening to our podcast version wherever those are served. We don't care. We're agnostic about how you're enjoying this program. We're just glad you're here. I'm Geoff Brault. He's Dr. Keith Strudler, Director of the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Our producer is Mike Wallace. We're in the middle of the madness. Keith, how's your bracket?
I believe in the 7th percentile the last like you have to actively try to do, like if you tried to pick as poorly as I did, you probably wouldn't be successful. There was a period during when I looked at one of the brackets where I realized I might, it was a series of like 8 games where I think I might have only won 2 of them. Like it was impossible to do as poorly as I did. I have enjoyed it immensely, though. This has been wild, and I know we're going to get to the elephant in the room, so whenever you're ready, we'll get there.
First, I want to know if you're coming around to something we touched on in our last episode, but didn't really dig deep into. You fill out brackets. I do not. You're in the 7th percentile. I didn't pick a single game incorrectly. Are you coming around to my way of thinking?
No, I'm not, because I still enjoy it.
What would you enjoy about that?
This is like not only not testing into algebra, but having them tell you need to go back to addition. Like, look, you're in the negative percentile. We've never seen that before. You're actually worse than people who have not taken the test. I enjoy it. And look, good. Now Elliot is in like the 90+%. My kids are doing great, but they, you know what? They go Dickie V and pick chalk. Like I like to have a little fun. And so I pick some upsets, and my upsets, oddly enough, were not consistent. That's the problem with brackets. There's 2 ways to do it. You either go chalk, which is how you're going to win most pools. If you want to win most pools, you go mainly chalk because the percentiles will work in your favor. Or you decide you're going to pick some upsets because you're going to go for the gusto. The problem with picking the upsets is it could lead you to the absolute promised land, because that's how you win the huge pool. 99 out of 100 times, it's going to lead you to the basins of hell because you're going to pick the wrong upsets. I mean, a lot of people thought Winthrop was going to win. Newsflash, Villanova's pretty good still.
I got to tell you, I gave in our last episode as a reason why I don't fill out a bracket that I hate the person who brags about picking the upsets right. And I got to tell you, I do still hate that person. But sneaking up hot on their tails is another person that I dislike, and that is the person who talks about how awful their bracket is, and how after every time there's a loss, every time they lose a team in the Final Four, they got to put on Twitter that their bracket's a dumpster fire. Why do I even bother? And I don't care for that person either.
Well, let's be clear. You don't care for most people on the planet Earth. I mean, you not only today, you decided to tell me at some point how you didn't care for the person who boarded the airplane, who rode the airplane the flight before you. You didn't know this person, but you decided.
No, it's not that I didn't care for them. It's not that I didn't care for them. And I will tell you exactly what happened.
I don't think you should.
Like a bad person. I don't. It won't, because you misconstrue what I said. This was the first time in my life that I have seen a seatbelt extender in the wild. So I get on my plane back from San Antonio this morning, and I'm looking around, and I'm on I don't want to say the name of the airline, but I will say they did a great job with COVID protocols. So actually, let's say the name of the airline. It could be a sponsorship bid. I was flying Delta, and I thought Delta did an extraordinary job with the COVID protocols. And they had the seat open next to me. This was not a 3 across, this was a 2 across plane. So the seat next to me was open, which is always great when you're on an airplane. So I sit down in a row by myself.
You've got a full row. You've got a full row, essentially.
A full row, 2 seats. Well, just 2 and 2. So I had 2
right,
seats.
But it is, by all accounts, a full row. It's a love seat. It's not a couch. It's a love seat.
So I'm trying to buckle myself in to, abide by FAA regulations. And I'm looking around and I see one buckle on the seat to my left. I see a buckle on my lap, but then I look to my right and I see another buckle. And I'm like, well, this is too many buckles. What do we have some sort of malfunction? Like, what's going on here? If you have 2 buckles and no like latchy end, whatever the other end is called, the seatbelt doesn't work. So I'm very confused. Turns out whoever sat in my seat before me required the use of a seatbelt extender. I have never seen those in the wild before. So I finally saw one, and it felt like my little row of the airplane, row 15, was like a little museum.
So normally we're going to move on from here because normally this is where we make like a Cracker Barrel joke.
Well, unlike you, I didn't say anything negative about the person before
the
me.
way you wrote the tone. Look, if text could have a voice, yours had a distinct tone to it. You shared information that I didn't ask for. You shared information that I didn't ask for. So now, by the way, when you're in that two seat, when you got the aisle and the window, and because there's a real tense, one of the most tense periods in life is when you start to realize that you may have the seat next to you open on an airplane. Yes. And the door is not yet closed. There's still some stragglers coming, right? Yep. It's those seconds feel like hours, right? Each one of them. And each person that comes on, you kind of size them up and you say, are you going to be my seatmate? Are you going to be a 9B? Like, do you look like a middle seat person? And as finally, when they close it and they say, it's over. Flights, we're taking off now. The exhale is spectacular. Now, when you realize that you have that two-seat operation, that, by the way, a very underrated situation, just having the two seats in a row. Mm-hmm. A smaller airplane, obviously, it could be a 2-3 configuration, sometimes a 2-2, depending on what you're flying. Or sometimes it could be a 2-5-2 if you're on an international flight or a long haul flight.
Sometimes could be a 1-2 if you're on a little puddle.
Well, that's when you start to check. You start to check your will and Final Testament. I learned this from my dad. He had a rule about airplanes: 2 pilots and 2 engines. And it's not a bad way to live, right? Because if one of them should fail in either place, you want to have the backup. So when you're in that situation and you realize you're set, do you opt for the window or do you opt for the aisle in that situation?
I'm typically window in that situation because it's a little more versatile, because you still get the extra leg room if you need. You can kind of orient yourself, to the left or to the right to get the additional leg room. And then you also have the window that you can lean against. If I'm trying to sleep on the plane, I will always try to go window. If I'm going to be awake the whole time, I prefer to go aisle.
Well, because it's more social. You have more opportunities. Once you go window, going window, you've made a deliberate choice to not be engaged with the rest of the flight. And,
yes.
And you don't want to look around, see what's going on. And
that actually brings up a very interesting point about flight etiquette. And I was thinking about this on my flights to San Antonio. When you go, if you say you're the second person in your row, do you acknowledge the other person there? Do you say like good morning, hello, or do you just sit down and say nothing?
Oh no, I absolutely have to.
Well, my very non-scientific study says that most people do not do that. There was an uncomfortable amount of silence of people that just find their seat, sit down, and do not acknowledge their row mates.
No, I think you have to. I think there's an unwritten code that you look at them and you have that moment where you decide, is this going to be a thing that we're going to do the whole flight? And you kind of size each other up. Is this someone with whom I'd like to have the conversation? You hope it's a match. You know what? This is actually a great business concept for us. We should be thinking about this. One of our a flight conversation Tinder app.
It's not a bad idea. Like some sort of social networking app for other people that are on your flight.
You match themselves up and you can decide if you want to match up with someone, and then you get seats. And so honestly, why assign seats until you've decided who you might want to sit with?
So that, I think, is the genius, right? If you take the 200 and however many people are on your flight, and everybody fills out a profile, you assign seats based on who would be a good match. And it doesn't necessarily mean romantic match. It could mean if you got 2 people who are both fans of, say, Gonzaga basketball, maybe they want to sit next to each other and watch the game on the TV screens. I think there could be something to this.
How much are people gonna fight over that when they're like, oh, Tom Cruise is on our flight?
Yeah, you think Tom's flying a lot of commercial airliners?
Southwest. He's like, oh, I checked in early. I'm on board in Group 1.
I get 2 free bags. Just because I got that Mission Impossible money doesn't mean that I want to pay $70 for baggage fees.
Rich people don't get rich by throwing it away.
You brought up an interesting point, that the palpable feeling of anticipation when you've got an empty seat on the airplane and you're waiting for people to come through. Nobody has a perfect bracket this year, by the way. Nobody got to the 3rd day of the tournament with a perfect bracket. But Let's just imagine that someone defied insurmountable odds and picked every game correctly until the national championship.
Oh boy.
What is that moment like? Because people like Warren Buffett have said, if you fill out a perfect bracket and can prove it, I'll give you $1 billion. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, there's $1 billion on the line. You've picked every game correctly up to the last one. And now you've got coin
it's
flip.
beyond impossible. It's like getting hit by lightning 7 times. It's beyond impossible.
Correct. Yes, you have. I believe you have a better chance of, by actual statistical odds, winning Powerball twice than you do of picking a perfect bracket. So it is truly impossible. But let's say that it was going to happen.
Yeah.
Could the human body survive that?
Well, I mean, we've all been in situations, and I won't get too graphic or descriptive, but we've all been in situations when our greatest fantasies might be realized. And I think
are we gonna have to check now? Is this the time where, because look, I know our time slot has been moving around a bit. We were on Wednesdays at midnight. We thought we were going to be on Thursdays at noon. Last week we aired at 2 p.m. Are we gonna have to get this show aired in the AM hours because of what you're about to say? Like,
No,
is it gonna be a Sportish after dark kind of situation?
No, I'm just saying look, it's kind of like in the job interview process. If you're like, I'm about to get my dream job, or a dating situation, whatever it is, there's always these moments where you're like, this is going to happen. Look, I think we experienced this together when we were like, we are going to walk down on the field during the Iron Bowl. And there was a point at which we were fairly certain the security personnel would say, Andy Billings can go, you two are going to have to wait. But, and this was like, when that look, I will say, like, even, I mean, from an athletic perspective, this is what you feel towards the end of like a big race. Like when you're like, when you're like, I am about to win this race that I have dreamed about winning for God knows how long, right? Or something like that. There is that moment during the last like couple hundred yards or whatever, where you're like, you almost have to fight failure. Like your body, it's like it wants to trip something. If you feel like something wants to go wrong, right? So I don't know, but I don't know. Can you watch that game? Can you watch it? I don't think I could watch it.
Like, I don't know if you could be conscious during that game.
You pass out.
Like, I mean, how could but imagine if you don't get that right, if you got every game right and lost the last one. I mean, that's almost worse than if you got it right.
Well, let's be clear. It's always worse. It's better to flame out miserably. I mean, I think we've all, this notion that it's better to have loved than lost. I mean, those for people, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure that's
like the liars who say it's better to give than receive.
No, but the problem is, so you've gone this far, there's still a 50% chance you're going to lose the thing.
That's exactly it. You're not down to a coin flip. Like when you go from 1 in 700 million to 1 in 2.
Yeah. But you think you're there, but the reality is, if the other team is in the final, they're good, like they're winning games. So I don't care what their ranking is, where they were placed. That is a team. It's kind of like when Butler made the finals. By the time Butler's in the finals, you're like, this team is winning games right now. I don't care who they are, where they are, how they're ranked. If you can get through the gauntlet to get there, you are that good at that particular moment.
I mean, it's a true coin flip game, right? Because, the odds are sort of computed based on every game being a 50-50 proposition. It isn't. The 1 seed's going to beat the 16 seed 98% of the time. So not every game is a true 50-50 choice. Yeah. The last one is. Like, the last one is about as close to a coin flip as you're going to get in sports.
The absolute, because not only are the teams at that point tried and tested and true, they also have proven, like, the most important thing about the NCAA tournament is it's not the best team, but it's the team that's playing the best, as they like to say. So that's it. I stole that, I believe, from Clark Kellogg or someone else. But it is the team that's playing the best. And at that point, you have two teams that are playing really, really well. You can't get to the finals. You might have an easier road to get there. And so you may not have had to go through, a couple of number ones, but you had to play some really good teams to get there. No one gets to the finals without playing really, really good basketball teams. So there you go. I mean, are we going to get to, you're
Yeah, we are. So while we're on the topic of brackets, you're not hiding, but you experienced the highs and lows of March with the Florida Gators.
So I will say this. I think that Florida's loss on Sunday may have been the single worst day of my life. Now,
Okay.
and as you know, someone who's known me for a long time, I've had some epic lows. Most of them self-inflicted.
I'm honestly surprised it was the single worst day of your week.
That's true. Give it time. Give it time. But I mean, so look, and this is the worst part is, this has been a very tough Florida year for me, because not that long ago, you and I were sitting and talking about the shoe game, right?
Guy threw a shoe. Yeah.
And cost the Gators a chance to really essentially play towards a national championship, to be in a position in the SEC title game, to be playing towards the playoffs. And so we endured that. And Florida is, look, I think I said this to you earlier, or I said it to someone certainly early in the week. Everyone likes the Cinderella. You like the Cinderella unless you're the Goliath. Like, I'll tell you what, like, you don't like no one. If you're like the big show in town, you're not like, well, Oral Roberts, they deserve it. You're like, I can't believe we lost to freaking Oral Roberts. They spend like $7 on their back. Like, at Florida spends more on like their iced tea budget, I believe, for meetings. So I will tell you, look, we're not going to go, because this is not really a sports show. We're not going to go through why, because I, as you can probably imagine, I've spent every night this week very deep in subreddits about Florida basketball, right? I mean, it's been really ugly. I've let myself go to a place that I don't ever typically let myself go. I have gone deep. We're not going to talk about why Florida has decided. And by the way, in case any of the college coaches are watching this program, I'm sure a lot of them are, to blow off steam before the tournament kicks back up. If you have the best players, the most athletic players, and the biggest players on the court, and you run something of a tempo offense, get to the rim. Get to the rim. Get to the rim. That rim is your friend. The other team has to shoot the threes and run the trick plays. You get to the rim. Arkansas, you get to the rim. Colgate can't stop you. They can't stop you. It's a nice team they've got, but they can't stop you. You get that ball to the rim. If we're coaching, I'm starting to sweat. I am starting to turn red. Get to the rim. So Florida, I don't know why, with 10, 12 minutes, when they're up 10 and they're rolling now. It's Gator Nation, right? Chomp, 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 right? It's on, right? And the super spreader event that was the Oral Roberts watch party, which was a sight to behold, by the way. I can't believe that they kept cutting away to the party. I think they were just cutting away to the party so they could do contract tracing as well as they could with all the people in the room.
I was going to say, you and all of the country's leading, virus specialists, leading epidemiologists couldn't believe they kept cutting away.
They were like, please, Florida's got to win this game or we're going to have a problem in Tulsa. I mean, I think there was one mask for the entire room that got passed around every now and then. And so I don't understand how they found a way to lose that game. I understand it happens. Teams really seem to tighten up. And we've seen this a lot this tournament. They tighten up. I mean, they tighten up. And I think, our esoteric sports expert friend, Jim Cotter, mentioned this. He's like, I wonder how much heavier that ball feels and your feet feel when you have to close out a team that's got nothing to lose. When you're playing, right? I mean, I think if Florida were playing a team that was a higher seed at that point, same kind of players, I don't think they would have shifted into this. Really, I think it's really hard for these players to realize, like, okay, we need to close out against a team for whom, if we lose, we are going to be the cover story, not just on like ESPN, like CBS morning show. Nora O'Donnell's like, how about Oral Roberts? Like, you've gone losing to a 15 seed in the second round is when you are one of the big dogs in the country, when you are one of like the 5 highest endowed athletic programs in the country. That's pressure. So that's where I am. So I will say this, and let me just get this on my, there was a point, and by the way, I now have 2 equally fervent Gator fans in the house. And I found how annoying it is to watch with someone like myself, because I'm listening to it with others. And so I can't tell you, and I'm sure you've been there, because you have some teams that you root for, certainly your Philly teams, where you really actually, there's that point where you say, even though it's not destined yet, you feel it, you start saying things like, they're going to lose. They're going to lose. They deserve to lose. They deserve to lose. I can't watch this. I cannot watch this anymore. I cannot watch. But the point when you say they're going to lose, they deserve to lose, that's when it's starting to happen. That's when it's starting to go south in your head.
What we don't know about Florida and about any of these big schools that lose to schools like Oral Roberts in this tournament, you never know how they approached the game. Because there are a lot of big schools that think, well, because we're Florida and they're a 15 seed that we've never heard of out of a conference that means they don't play anybody, we can just show up and get to the rim. And then you realize that these teams are pretty good. And if you don't take them seriously, you can lose. And so you never know. You never know. Some coaches at the highest level are very, very good about every opponent deserves the same attention and the same scout. And then there's a lot of coaches that are like, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to focus on us. And that's usually when you get got. When you go into a game and you're like, well, we just got to do what we do and we're going to win. That's usually when you get nipped, because this Oral Roberts team is for real. That little guard they got, that Abe Smith kid, he is legit.
He's good. He's absolutely. I can see that. And I think all of the teams that get to this point, there's a reason they've gotten there. They have some overlooked player, or in the case of Colgate, a couple of players and a system, right, that works really well, and they can shoot. There are all these teams that you figure out at some point, if they dominated their conference, they somehow found their way to some talented players that buy into a system. No one is going to convince me that a school that probably has several potential NBA players, it should be losing to a team that has 3 or 4 people entering the seminary when they graduate. I mean, I just won't. I will not buy into that. And so I think the coaches do take these opponents seriously. Now, again, I'm not in the head. I think they do. I just think the weight of that loss gets really, really heavy. I think when all of a sudden it goes from 10 to 8 to 4, like you're just thinking like, Oral Roberts not thinking. They're just playing.
Well, welcome to the magic of this tournament. So for there to be an upset, right? People think that like it's a zero-sum situation. It's not. If you're an underdog, what you're trying to do is just add percent chance of victory to the, the opportunity that you have in front of you to beat a team like Florida. So if you come into the game and you say, all right, if we just throw this ball up and play, maybe we got a 2% chance of winning. But if you're that underdog, all you're trying to do is, all right, if we can do X, maybe it bumps our chance up to 4%. Yeah. If we can do Y, maybe it bumps our chance up to 8%. And then you start thinking, all right, well, if we can play them even in the first half, maybe it bumps our chance up to 30%. And so you're just constantly trying to stack on percent chance to pull off an upset. And, if you get that number high enough, your number's going to come up every once in a while.
Absolutely. And you have to look, things have to fall in your favor. The other team, look, Florida has to go cold because again, if Florida plays their game, they win every single time. Right. That's just the name, but you have to, and I think you got it. And this is what it's so frustrating as a fan. And this is when I think I probably said in the first half, like, we're going to lose, even though we were winning. This is the hard part about these tournament games. When you watch your superior team not be able to put away a team, that's the thing that drives you nuts. When they're still up 5, but they're turning the ball over, and in your head, you're like, that's going to cost us later, because we're all Oral Roberts had no imagination they're going to win this game by 20, right? They are like, our plan is to try to sneak out a win. And the only way they can do that is if my Florida Gators, the team that I love, the team that I die for, ride or die, if they let them stick around. They invited Oral Roberts to the party. That's what happened.
It's why the NCAA tournament in equal measure is awesome and a really stupid way to decide the national champion, because you do not find out who the best basketball team is. No. Oral Roberts is not better than Florida. They're not. If they played 100 times, Florida's probably winning 85 of those games, 90 of those games. Yeah. But when you get in a one and done situation, like you talk about in this tournament, stuff happens. And Oral Roberts was the better team on that day, and they are still alive for a national championship, and Florida is not. It's the magic of this tournament.
So that hurt. That one hurt. That one really, I will tell you it hurt.
And I know it hurt. And I can't say that I was, I didn't want Florida to lose. I didn't so much have a rooting interest. I do typically root for every low seed. So I'm kind of happy that Oral Roberts won. I'm happy that Oral Roberts won because I'm a fan of irony. Oral Roberts University, if you don't know, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is
you wanted them to lose, so I would mope around for several days, and so not only and so then we could come on the show and you could bring it up again. You knew it would make for good television.
I wanted Oral Roberts to win for one reason and one reason only. So Oral Roberts University is a Christian university. It's the place you go to when liberty is just a little too liberal for you. Oral Roberts University, this is absolutely true. In their student code of conduct, does not allow social dancing. Their students aren't allowed to dance. And they are the number one story in the big dance. So only for that reason was I rooting for Oral Roberts.
It's true. Now, a little known fact, Baylor used to ban dancing as well. So Baylor, I mean, look, I understand when you've got Liberty and Oral Roberts in the field, Baylor doesn't get the credit they deserve for being a highly religious institution. But don't think, I mean, when we do this, look, it would actually be fun to do the religious school bracket and to see them according to their virtuosity, I suppose. And I'd like to open it up to Division III because, look, I think Yeshiva University's got as good a shot as anyone. I think it should not be limited to fundamental Christian universities. But Baylor, they'd be at. I understand they're a 1 seed in the big dance. They'd be at least a 2 line in the religious fest. Do you think God helps out? I mean, you've got Loyola Chicago. Do you think there's anything there? I know you're not you're not going to get religious until you're coming up against it.
Sure. I am going for the quick deathbed repentance. Yeah, that is the plan. I mean, look, Sister Jean has something going for her, right? Yeah. Like this Loyola Chicago thing, anybody can do it once. They're not doing it twice. I don't know. I mean, there might be something to Sister Jean might have a direct line to the Almighty.
I don't ask for much.
The other big story of the NCAA tournament is the disparity in the bubbles. So the entire men's tournament's in Indianapolis, the entire women's tournament is in San Antonio. They are not the same. I have some firsthand knowledge of the San Antonio tournament. I was down there for 3 days covering the opening round. Look, a lot has been said about the disparities in the bubbles, and it's clearly true. We have pictures, like we know that they're not the same. Yeah. Here's the point that I don't think's been made enough is that the most disheartening thing about this to me is that it was intentional. Like they didn't forget to build a weight room in the women's bubble. It was in the handbook that all the teams were given that there'd be no weight room available until the round of 16. So it was a conscious choice not to do that. And then when they put the pictures up on the screen and they go, but well, we didn't think there was space for a weight room. And they're like, we're in a convention center. And they're like, oh, there was, like, they made the choice. They go, well, we don't need to do that. They made the choice not to have pool photography at the women's game so that pictures could be disseminated to media across the country. They made those choices. And that to me is way worse than if they were like, oh, that was an oversight. We should have done better. Like the March Madness branding on the court. Why is the women's tournament not also branded March Madness? The Wall Street Journal actually got that answer. You know why? They don't want to. The NCAA doesn't want to extend that branding into the women's tournament, which makes absolutely no sense to me. That's what struck me as almost, and I'm going to actually, it's what struck me as the most offensive thing about the disparities is that it was created intentionally. This wasn't an oversight.
Sports takes with Geoff Brault. Geoff Brault's getting heated now.
Not a hot sports take, but this wasn't an oversight. This wasn't we just forgot about them. They didn't forget to build a weight room for the women. They chose not to do it.
So what's interesting, and look, again, I don't want to get, there's a big rabbit hole that people are going down with. Well, let's look at the difference in the revenue they generate. And not only do I not want to go down that because it actually, it's not that it's just a red herring. It's that there are things that we don't know either. When we start to like this really, because that argument really then starts to get you towards well, maybe the men's players should be getting paid if they're generating that much revenue. Also an important point that should be noted, almost every sports program is a loss leader at a university outside of the 40 or 50. Now, I'm going to say something that probably, look, I'm sure there is not a single women's program, maybe outside of UConn, some Tennessee, some that really draw, that are actually generating revenue. They all lose money. On the men's side, there is a group of 20 that make money and the rest lose money. Right. So let's get those. Now, the March Madness does generate a ton of revenue, more on the men's, obviously, primarily on the men's side because of their television contracts. That does help to amortize a lot of athletic conferences. But the money argument becomes very much a red herring, and it shouldn't be the argument here. Right. There's also some interesting kind of analogies to any of us that participated in non-revenue generating sports. Like, I mean, if you participate, if you are a swimmer, correct, field hockey player, track and field, whatever, like you live this life. You always knew that you weren't getting the same gear as the other, whether or not they generated revenue or not, right? I mean, if you were at Cornell in any sport other than perhaps hockey or football, you knew you were getting, at one point back lesser, right? And I think they've worked hard to change that and alleviate that at most universities. So, but what I find most surprising about this, and I think you illuminated the point of why this was wrong, but what I find surprising is the lack of self-awareness, the lack and so look, look, if you're in the job that I'm in, where you're running a school that's a big common media school, right? And you're dealing with public perception and a big, large public state university. I know people look at us to make sure that we're doing the right thing. We also have a PR and soon to be an advertising program. Like, I understand perception. What I don't understand is when the NCAA sat down, they got a lot of people that work in their communications office, right? And there are a lot of smart people that work about imaging and brand. Didn't sit down and be like, all right, we're in an era of intense focus on racial justice. A lot of people are locked in their house and they're still kind of consumed by social media content. There's constant conversations about gender equity. We better make sure, regardless of, look, I don't care. In some cases, I don't really care what the people who work at the NCAA think, whether they think it should be. I'm just so shocked that they couldn't say, we better, everything's going to be public. The scrutiny on this tournament is remarkable because of the COVID situation. There's all sorts of eyeballs. We better get this right. How did that not come into play?
Well, so I was actually having some conversation with people about that very thing. Because if you're sitting in a room and you're planning these tournaments, there's no way you can make them as unequal as they were. And that didn't happen. The men's basketball planning and marketing and the women's basketball planning and marketing are almost completely siloed from each other. There is little to perhaps no, I mean, I don't have the NCAA org chart in front of me, but there is very little overlap between the two. And this year is such a special case because it's never been presented head to head before. Typically, the way these tournaments work is on the men's side, everybody goes to an arena somewhere in a site and they set up 10 of these little mini bubbles for 8 teams. On the women's side, you play the first couple of rounds on the sites of the high seeds. So you're on a campus site. So you don't need to build a weight room if you're the NCAA because you just use the weight room at North Carolina or whatever school you're at. This is the first time, at least in women's basketball, that this has ever come up. And so the women's crew was faced with having to do something they've never had to do before, whereas the men's side was basically just doing what they always do on a larger scale. And there wasn't a lot of conversation between the two.
I can tell you that's going to change.
Well, it is going to change. Mark Emmert has said as much. He to his credit, I guess, it took him 4 days to put out a statement, but he put out a statement and said, we're going to do an independent review. Yeah. What happened is unacceptable. We're going to need to fix this going forward.
You were in San Antonio. What did you think of the uplighting in the weight room?
I was not allowed anywhere near the weight room.
By the way, Geoff Brault may have been the only person in San Antonio to be like, who needs a weight room? Like, wait, we're playing basketball. They're going to make us do cardio as well. When do we get to eat?
Listen, I spent a fair amount of my time trying to figure out how I could sneak a dozen donuts into the quarantine bubble. And spoiler alert, I was successful. So that shows you where my mindset was.
Public service announcement, by the way, you know this. If you show evidence of your vaccine shot, you get a Krispy Kreme donut. And from what I have read, you can do it day after day.
For an entire year. It's the greatest promotion ever invented. It's unbelievable. The fact that the closest Krispy Kreme to where I live is Penn Station in New York City is a big problem in my world. Big problem. That's
why you come on down to Bergen County, New Jersey. There's probably a Krispy Kreme in my house somewhere.
The last thing I want to say about the disparities in bubbles, I guess I want to say 2 more things. One, Lynn Holtzman, who runs women's basketball for the NCAA, really loves women's basketball. Like, she is a great advocate for the sport, and this has been a bad week for her. I think she's getting something of a bad rap with people who are like, how can you be in charge of this? You're going to let this happen. Extraordinary circumstance for everybody this year. They clearly dropped the ball. She acknowledges that. This is not a person who does not want to see the game grow.
Of course.
And that brings me to my second point, the growth of the game. The NCAA is probably the entity, it's either them or the NBA, and I think it's the NCAA more than the NBA, that is responsible for the growth of basketball, right? And I'm not talking about growing men's basketball, I'm talking about growing the sport of basketball. One of the best things about it is it's a game that can be played by literally anyone, men, women, tall, short, rich,
how
poor.
short? Well, I mean, how short?
As short as you need to be. Some of the best players in America are small guards, 6 foot guards in the men's side. Allen Iverson.
You want to take everyone under
Bogues.
6? You want to go everyone under 6'2"? I'll take everyone over 6'2". We'll line it up.
But I'm just saying they can play. They can play. Like there's a space for them.
I thought that was more baseball was really the sport that any size, any shape could play. I feel like you're stealing that. Basketball has a fairly recognizable body type, large.
In terms of growth, right? The growth property in basketball right now is women's basketball. The men with their $800 million a year TV contract, they just about maxed out their value, I think. I don't know that there's a lot more juice they can squeeze out of that lemon. The women's tournament is the NCAA's third most valuable property. Why they don't want to grow that and invest in that, the growth potential there is so much higher than it is on the men's side. Why they don't want to invest in growing that revenue stream by doing things like branding it March Madness and making it seem like a legitimate tournament so that the stories around the media are, look how great this is, not look how awful this is beyond me. It's beyond me. So when you talk about the revenues, like you're right, the men make so much more money, and that's not the argument. The argument should be that the women's property is number 3 for the NCAA. Why aren't they investing in growing that revenue stream?
Certainly invest in the growth. Look, and you can do both, by the way. I actually think there is more money in the men's side as well. And one of the things that was brought to my attention a few years ago was that college sports as an aggregate, which included football, of course, is still one of the most undervalued properties on television. So I actually think I think you'd be surprised to realize that there, as much as anything can grow, there is growth potential. But look, the reality is you can do all of it, and there's great you should be doing all of it. I think there's probably going to be a lot of conversations, and sometimes when you have a successful property, and the NCAA has said, we have the men's basketball tournament, which we have branded with March Madness, and we don't want to touch that, right? We don't want to address we've sold that property. I'm not saying this is right. I'm saying we have given that to our sponsors. It's been branded in a specific way. My guess is this off season, which will be, hopefully one where we will start to go back to a more normal form of sport starting, 10 years from now. I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of conversation, not only internally, but externally with sponsors and with media companies about what is the most profitable and viable way forward. Because this is going to be a conversation with sponsors as well. This is going to be a hopefully with viewers. So I think we'll learn a lot more. And again, I don't like to get too deep into the numbers of what's profitable and what's not, and what's the best way to sell and package, just because I don't know the details of the contract. And some of this does. Not that it makes it right. Some of this does become contractual at some point, but I do think there is going to be a lot of conversation on a lot of college campuses, on top of the carnage that, by the way, will still possibly be college sports this offseason when athletics departments, I understand this is a big juggernaut. People are losing money all over the place, all over the place. I mean, yes, people are watching on TV. Those empty arenas. I mean, you were in an empty stadium. That's not good for business. I don't care how many people are watching. You can't survive that way. These sports need fans in the building. And there are going to be a lot of schools that are going to have to evaluate. We're going to wait till the offseason or till the school. Remember last year we went through the carnage of how many swim programs can get cut, and does anyone still wrestle? Right? That's not over. This is going to continue.
It's hard to weep for billionaires, but you're right. If you own a sports team or a major sports property, you took a bath over the last year. And now look, I'm not here to say that like Jerry Jones and Mark Cuban need to, that we need to start a GoFundMe page. They're still doing fine and they'll be okay. But these are businesses at the end of the day, and they have lost hundreds of millions of dollars.
Do you think Mark Cuban is pulling back a little bit on his Shark Tank? He's like, look, I was going to go for that electric sponge, but Mr. Wonderful, if you want to do a royalties deal, you're just going to have to And he's always a royalty deal. It's always a royalty deal.
American Airlines Arena was at 10% capacity that last year, and for that reason, I'm out. Just saying it over and over again in the mirror.
I love his strategy because he comes in strong on the deals.
Yeah.
He's like, look,
he's got more money than all of them.
I can literally
I guess
buy.
Kevin's close. Kevin's got a lot of money too. It depends your definition of close. Like once you get into the billion, they're not Barbara. Like Barbara's the one that Barbara doesn't belong. Not in that league. I mean, Barbara's doing very well. She's doing very well.
Oh no, hundreds of millions, but she's still like, I got to call my accountant on this one, right? No, they're all I actually don't know. They're all hundreds of millions into the billions, right? But I do feel like Mark Cuban comes in, he's like, look, I can buy every single person on the stage. I can buy the building. I can do it's like a Bruce Wayne situation, right? Where I'm going to buy the hotel. And so he does come in strong when he wants a property. He does. I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank.
Speaking of entities taking a bath because of fans not being allowed, there will be no international spectators at the Olympics in Tokyo this year. Looks like they're going to happen. So now we'll say that Keith Strudler was right. The Tokyo Olympics will likely happen, but they're going to happen with nobody there. Glad you built that velodrome, Tokyo.
Yeah. Well, the velodrome, we've been over this. The velodrome was a useful, we could all benefit from a velodrome. I'd love to have a velodrome in my backyard. I would use that all the time. Look, I mean, these stadiums go unused after the Olympics anyway. I mean, they become great places to like store stuff. I mean, it's like buying a treadmill. So I mean, it really, they are going to take a bath. It's just how big a bath do you want to take, right? So Tokyo and Japan and the IOC is in a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Holding these Olympics is going to cost them a lot of money, right? Not hosting the Olympics is going to cost them an infinite amount of money and perhaps their entire business model, right? And so they have to this is like, I mean, they're going to have to plow through it. Like, this is one of those situations when you're giving a speech and it's not going well and you're like, well, or you're on a date and you're like, we can either stop now or I'm just going to keep on. We're going to ride this thing through until we're like, yeah, that was fun. Right. And so that's where they are. They are going to host. I mean, unless there is an epic outbreak, they are going to hold the Olympics, but they're not going to allow international fans to come. So they are going to be very much in the New Zealand model. It does sound low. It does sound like they are going to make vaccines available to all the participants. So that seems like, which I think I said this before. I understand people are going to be bothered by that. I actually think it's a good idea. In the aggregate of the billions of people in the world that need to be vaccinated, that rounding error of 5,000 to ensure there's not some kind of, I
actually think by June or July, when the Olympics start, we're going to have the supply. We're at that point. I think anybody who wants a vaccine will be able to get one.
In America, not in the rest of the world. There are parts of this.
In Japan? This is Japan.
No, I'm not. Yeah, but they have fancy toilets.
Well, I mean, Japan is an industrialized nation. Like, I'm sure they're doing fine with the vaccine rollout. I didn't Google that in preparation for the show. I didn't know it was coming up. But, Japan does not strike me as a place that's struggling to provide health care to their people.
The athletes that are coming from the 200 plus countries around the world, those are the people who are going to be getting the vaccine. And they probably don't have, half of these countries will not have supply, right? The non-industrialized countries that participate in the Olympics. So there are several countries that will not. How would you like, are you big on like the Japanese toilets, the fancy toilets to do everything?
I think so I've never experienced one. I think it's one of those things that's better in theory than in practice. That, you read the box and it's a lot of marketing and you're like, this is going to be great. And then you get it and you just sort of use it as a regular toilet. Like,
I think
how many people have like the crazy Nespresso coffee machine and they just make like decaf with cream? There you go.
By the way, you can start a sentence with how many people have, and my hand's going to. Is there anything that I will not have I bought that. Yeah, I got it. Why not? You can't take it with you. Might as well. you only live twice. I mean, just do it. So
how bad are the Olympic ratings going to be without fans there? Because no fans dramatically changes the atmosphere of these sporting events, obviously in person, but also on television. And I think March Madness has borne that out. These games are not as fun without packed arenas.
Do you think so?
I do.
But yeah, are you saying that because you were at an arena, or you?
No, I'm thinking about the television viewing experience. It's not the same. Like much of what makes these games dramatic is the cutaways to the crowd shots and the ebbs and flows and the
they got the crowd away. They just keep going to Oral Roberts. You get your crowd shots. If you want your crowds, Oral Roberts will pack a crowd for any team.
But I think that's a big
USC,
reason.
You want a room full of people? We'll get you a room full.
That's
what they should do. Oral Roberts should run a service where they will pack rooms to cheer for your team. Hey, is your campus on?
Like how teams are far away, borrow a band. It's like borrowing a band.
We got plenty of students that will get in a room together without masks and yell and scream with your jerseys on.
But I think not having people at the Olympics, not having the pageantry of the Olympics, is going to make your casual fan, your fans, your people that aren't regular fans of the heptathlon, they might not be tuning in.
Yeah, well, remember, not all of these things. I mean, if you've been to an Olympic Games, there are plenty, and this happens in many countries, plenty of these events are not full anyway. I mean, you go to a ninth place volleyball game, it's empty. And so I actually don't think it's going to be as drastic as you think. I actually haven't been bothered. I haven't been bothered by basketball.
On TV. Like, you got to think the 100 meters is going to be run in front of no one.
Now that is, so you actually picked, of course you picked the one example that I don't, because that is, I don't think it's going to affect most of the sports. I will tell you, and having been like in an arena, like when, the 200 meter runner from the 90s, the gold shoes, Michael Johnson. I've been at both trials and at the Olympics when he's running, and the electricity in that space when he is about to run is like, it's like a prize fight. And so I agree, there are going to be certain events like the 100, but I'll tell you what, the 10,000 meters going to be just as boring in an empty arena as it is in a full one. I actually think, I know we got to run. I actually think it's going to be more dictated by where, because remember, Japanese fans can go. If you live in Japan, you can attend. I actually think this is going to be dictated about our viewership based on where we are globally in the crisis, as opposed to whether or not, if we're starting to feel normal, I think we'll watch. That's my hot take.
That's all we've got for this episode of Sportish. Thanks for coming along for our March Madness edition. If you found this show airing on For the Fans, ftfnext.com, tell us how, because we don't know what time it's on anymore. But we do know that archives...
2 p.m. It's on 2 p.m. and you know that. It's 2 p.m.
We've lied to the people before.
Thursdays.
Archives on YouTube. Listen to us as a podcast. We'll see. He's Keith. I'm Geoff. Thanks, Mike. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Sportish. See you next time.